To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. That is a quote by the poet E.E. Cummings. Hello, welcome back to The Whole Being. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about what it means to be authentic. To answer the question, who in the world am I? And this topic came about because just yesterday I was talking to my friend, just, chit-chatting as we do. But as we were talking, the topic of authenticity came up and we just kept going around, not in circles, but, as the discussion went on, it turns out we were kind of coming at it from two different points of view, right? Like, what does authenticity really mean? What does it mean to truly be yourself? And she was saying her perspective is that she's always thought that in order to truly be your authentic self, it means like you more or less have to be the same person to all people at all times, right? Like having a uniform type of being is the way to be authentic. And it was so interesting because I had an entirely different point of view. I was thinking along the lines of authenticity is less of I have to be the same person to all people at all times and more in this space that I'm in right now. Am I being true to myself? And those two things seem to be the same, but I have found that they are not the same. And I thought about this all through yesterday because I think I am someone who has come a long way in being able to express my authentic self. It takes a long time to get there. And the one recurring theme over like what we'll be talking about today is that it is not even a one-stop thing. It is a very continuous thing. It's a thing that you continue exploring as long as you're alive, right? But what I was really thinking about, like, in order for you to be authentic, not for us to be authentic or to say we're expressing our authentic self, do we really have to be the same person to all people at all moments, at all times? And I'm going to say my answer is not really, because on some level, I think there's a little bit of performing when it comes to being yourself. And I know like we don't want to perform, be the kinds of people who are like performing our lives. That's not what I mean at all, that we're out here performing to an audience. But when it comes to being yourself in relation to other people in different spaces, there is a little bit of performing there in that you are choosing who to be at that point in time, right? That's what I was thinking. So I think the more accurate question is, in this room that I'm in right now, the question you should be asking, in this room that I'm in right now, and in this person that I am being, am I in the director's seat? That was what I was telling my friend yesterday. It's like, that's kind of how I look at it. Am I the one directing myself, or am I being directed by all the other people here? Am I playing a role that they want me to play, or am I playing the role that I want to play? Am I showing up the way I want to show up in this moment? Because part of being like a human being is being able to react differently depending on the environment. But does that mean you're being less true to yourself or you're being inauthentic? No, I don't think so. It means you show up as who you determine yourself to want to be in that moment, right? You are the one making the choice. That is where we left off yesterday when I was talking to my friend. And then I just went on and I said, thinking about this, I'm like, let me turn this into a full podcast episode. Let me really explore these thoughts because I've been thinking about it for a long time. The topic of authenticity in itself is something that comes up for me a lot because I'm someone who, puts myself out there on social media. So it definitely comes up a lot. Like, am I really portraying myself truly the way I want to? So I had been thinking about it a lot, but having a conversation with my friend yesterday really helped me synthesize a lot of the thoughts, like to going back and forth with her. And I thought, why not share it with you, share our thought process with you and what we kind of came up with when it came to thinking about authenticity. Let's talk about it. So if you know me, you know that I like to think of words. I like to think of the origin of words, but more importantly, their definitions and what we as the human race or as people have interpreted them to be over time. How has the meaning changed over time? What do different people have to say? I like to think about those things. And so in thinking about authenticity, I started thinking about some of the quotes and philosophers over time that have made it their job to study how we should or do portray ourselves in the world. And oh my God, people have had so much to say over time. And the one thing research will always show you is that over time, we as a human race have really just been investigating the same things over and over and over again. Because anytime I go back and I do research, I'm like, we really have just been asking the same questions or been trying to answer the same questions over time, right? Because no matter how far back you go, we're still having the same conversations. So what I found from earlier on when it comes to authenticity is a lot of philosophers have had a lot to say about it, but there were three three that really stood out to me. The first was from Kierkegaard, and he believed that being authentic really means breaking from the cultural and social constraints and living a more self-determined life. In other words, non-conforming. He thinks non-conforming or not conforming to cultural and social definitions and making sure that you're living a life that you determine for yourself is what it means to be authentic, right? Which is not wrong in its entirety. And later on, a German philosopher called Martin Heidegger said authenticity means accepting who you are today and living up to all the potential that you have in the future. And then decades later, a French existentialist called Sartre came out and shared a kind of similar idea that he believed that people, no matter who they are, have the freedom to explore themselves and their experiences and interpret them however they like, and that whatever that person finds, whatever they find, being true to oneself means living as the person that they have investigated themselves to be. There was one common thread that I found amongst like all these philosophers. There were a couple more, but they were basically at some point all just saying the same thing. But the common thread was that when you're looking at yourself as a person, there is something about you that represents who you really are. And if you can find who that true self is hidden behind the false self that you put outside, then you would claim to be living a perfectly authentic life. And I don't disagree with them. I think there is an element to truth in every single thing that I found that they were saying. But to me, it just seemed very formulaic. It didn't seem very real to me, because the one common thread that I found in all their definitions of authenticity and the way they were describing it is that first, a person must be self-aware, and then you must decide what determines who you truly are, then decide the characteristics of that true self, and then behave in a way that is aligned to those characteristics that you found. And it's such a like step-by-step process in like a 1, 2, 3. First, be self-aware. First, determine who you truly are, and then determine the characteristics of who that true person is, and then go on to behave in that way. And acting in any way that is different from what you have found yourself to be is, in their definition, considered false or fake, merely to please others. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just very formulaic, and I just don't know how applicable that is to the ongoing human experience. I'm sure like if most of them had lived long enough, they would have probably disproved or have added to some of the points that they were making, right? But there were lots of things not being accounted for from my point of view. They were assuming that first, every person has to be self-aware of all the time, which I think puts you in a mode of like constant self-analysis and self-contemplation most of the time, especially when there are other people around, because you're constantly watching yourself to make sure that you're acting in alignment with who you think you are, which, while I don't think is wrong, is a very strict, non-fluid, non-flow way of living that I personally just don't subscribe to. I also don't believe that we are here to try to understand ourselves. We are here to live. You're not here to analyze yourself to death. So there was just something about those definitions that just didn't align, or that I just couldn't bring myself to agree with. And I think that feeling, or the way like I understand life, my perspective of life, is what really made the difference in the conversation that I was having with my friend yesterday, is that there has to be, I believe there is a flow to which you live your life, and expecting that authenticity or being an authentic person means that you are a certain version of yourself all the time, and any deviation from that is false. It just didn't sit right to me. A lot of these definitions and a lot of these thought processes also assume that you can be totally objective about defining who you truly are, which entirely discounts the impacts of our upbringing, our environments, and our relationships, because as you know, our environments have informed a huge part of who we are, why we act the way we act, why we think the way we think, why we think the things that we think. So assuming that you can assess yourself and be totally objective discounts the influence that your environments and other people and your relationships have on you. And like I said, it also doesn't hold a lot of space for being human, for being an anxious person in the midst of other people, for being the stranger in certain spaces, for feeling unwelcome and not quite knowing how to fit in when you find yourself in certain spaces, which plays a huge part in why we even ask these questions to begin with, right? Simply the act of feeling in itself, feeling things that you can't even put a name to. So the question of me is like, if you're feeling all these things and you're acting a certain way because of all these feelings, are you then not being authentic? And I'm not even kidding you when I tell you that this kept me up for about 2 more hours last night. But my understanding is now that being authentic is a feeling that you get in the moment. And that feeling is a sign that you are in alignment with your true self, right? And I think that is more important than any definition and any like constant self-analysis that some of these definitions were kind of putting out there. And what I like most about this point of view is that I don't even think it requires you to fully know who your true self is, which I think is like the real crux of this conversation, right? Who is my true self? But it does require a lot of self-trust, a lot of trusting your intuition, trusting your gut. And while that is hard, I think it is still the best way to human. It is the best way to like really get to understand yourself as a human being, as opposed to trying to tick some boxes on your way to determining whether you are an authentic person or not. If you're a reader, I'm going to give 3 book recommendations that I think really help with exploring these topics, or at least like I've read over the years that have really helped me understand authenticity, exploring your true self, or having the courage or cultivating the courage to even explore your true self. The first is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. The second is a book that isn't really on authenticity. It's more for introverts, and it's a book called Quiet by Susan Cain. And the third book is also by Brené Brown. It's called The Gift of Imperfections. But anybody, if you listen to or read or follow the work of Brené Brown, you know she talks a lot about courage, authenticity, shame, or not letting shame rule your life, and like self-expression type of content. She's very good at it. But I do remember her definition of authenticity, but I don't know which of those 2 books she said this in. But she said authenticity is not something that we have or don't have. It is a practice. It is a conscious choice of how we want to live. Authenticity is a collection of choices that we have to make every day. It's about the choice to show up and be real. It is a choice to be honest. It is a choice to let our true selves be seen. I love that definition so much. And there are 2 key words that always pop up for me every time I think about that definition. The first is honest, and the second is practice. So when she says it is a choice to show up and be real, it is a choice to be honest. I love that phrasing because at its core, being your true self is a choice that you're making to be honest, not just to yourself, but also to be honest to others. And the second one is that it is a practice. And if you don't take away anything else, if this is one thing that you're going to take away from this episode, it is that it is a practice, which means it is not something that you either have or don't have, or something that you become at one point. It is something that is going to be constant. It's not something that you discover and then boom, you go and be that version of you or that person all the time. There are 2 ways that you can really think about it. And I think that when it comes to authenticity, there are really like 2 sides to one coin. One part of the coin is rejecting conformity, and the other part is finding your social self. Because like I said in a lot of my videos on TikTok, and I think I even said it in the last episode, we do not live or grow or thrive in isolation, right? We grow in community. We live in community with each other, and authenticity plays a huge part in that. So not conforming is one part of it, but finding your social self, how you want to put yourself in the environments that you find yourself in, are not like 2 separate things. They both have to work together. You have to balance these 2, understanding that these 2 are sides of the same coin. And of course, when you think about it, non-conforming or rejecting the mask that we have been taught to put on over time based on our upbringing, religious beliefs, things that have been put upon us or taught to us by our caretakers. While that can be practiced in community with others, it is more important to practice first when you're alone than when you're with other people. It requires a lot of self-reflection. It requires a lot of thinking, a lot of like getting to really know yourself, which I know some of us don't like. We do not like the idea of being alone. We do not like the idea of reflecting, asking ourselves certain questions, asking, what are my values? Why do I act the way I do? Why do I feel the way I do? What are some of the things that inform the decisions that I make about how I dress, how I look, how I want to be perceived, how I want to be valued? Rejecting conformity is one of those things where, like, if you practice it more, if you ask and reflect more on yourself when you're alone, being yourself when other people come into the equation will be a lot more natural. There will be an ease, a flow with which you will find yourself being yourself. There are some parts of this that you can't really do relative to other people. You can't really consider other people and how they will react or how they will perceive you when you're working on this part. Because if you want to learn who you truly are, the first best place to start, I think, is where you can be the most yourself, which is alone, where there is no audience to perform for, no other feelings to consider, just you. What do you want? And this is not to say that you can't ask people who are safe spaces for you. If you have questions about yourself that you don't think you can answer on your own, and you have people who are safe enough, who can accurately reflect a loving version of you, or say things that are hard to hear in loving ways to you, I absolutely think it is worth not outsourcing, but bringing other people into the conversation too. But in getting to know yourself, there are going to be alone seasons. There are going to be some things that you're just going to have to go in and investigate. You have to get to know yourself from the inside out, not always from the outside in. There's a huge element of, if I want to get to know my true self, if I want to present an authentic version of myself to the world, I have to get to know that person first. I have to know how that person operates, what that person feels, what they value, what they like, what their boundaries are. Because if you don't get to know that person, if you don't get to really know yourself, how will you even know when you're showing up as yourself or not as yourself? And like I said, that is still just one part of the coin. The other part of the coin is the social you, the you that you share with the world, the you that exists in community and in relationship with other people. And I really think this is the part that gets tricky for most of us. But you have to accept and acknowledge that there's a version of you, the real you does not exist outside of the relationship that you have with others. And I think there are parts of us that want to really reject that idea because we like to think that we have more control, or we exert more control over all of our actions and our reactions than we actually do. And yes, the one thing that you can practice controlling is how you choose to react to situations and to people. But at the same time, you and your environment are constantly influencing each other in many countless ways. And we are all hopefully part of networks of people and relationship that shape who we present ourselves as, which is why I said in the previous episode that you have to be intentional. You have to be careful with the people that you allow to be in your circle and the people who you choose to be a part of, right? There are subtle ways in which we influence each other, influence the way we think, the way we act, the way we reason, the way we empathize with each other, right? So you want to be sure to not just know yourself, but also put yourself in spaces that will help you grow into the person that you really want to be. You have to be cognizant, like the people around you, how do they think? How do they think? How do they react? How do they see the world? And is that something that you want to be in alignment with? Those are things that you have to consider. So realize that and move mindfully, because you are not quite as independent as you think you are. And at the same time, you're much more powerful than you give yourself credit for. You're able to influence things. People are able to influence you too. And true authenticity, being your authentic self, is being able to balance who you are on the inside, your personal self, and the part of you that interacts with the world. And you have to cultivate the courage to do it. It is probably one of the scariest things that you ever do. It is also very paradoxical, because even though finding your authentic self, being your authentic self will make you the best company with the people that you're in a relationship with, it is also, well, quite possibly can be one of the loneliest things that you ever do. But it is living. It is the worthiest adventure that you will go on. It is your life, but you won't regret it. Practicing being yourself, coming face to face with the parts of you that you have been taught over time to reject. You have been taught that they are flawed. Accepting those parts of you, it is the most grueling thing that you will probably ever do with your life, but it is also the most rewarding thing. It'll make you feel feelings, some of which you can't even put to words. But the good thing about it is, once you realize that it is a lifelong thing, there is a sense of urgency in wanting to find and become yourself. But at the same time, there's no rush to get it right at once. There's no rush to get it right in the first try. You have your life to do it, and you don't have to pause your life or pause your relationship in order to get to know yourself. The more you get to know yourself, the more you will attract people who will love you, flaws and all. That's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to wait until you are perfect and you have gotten rid of all the bad parts before you then go and declare yourself as lovable. That's not how it works. It is the journey. And off topic, but also on topic, I love the Velveteen Rabbit. It is in my top 10 children's book that I think every adult should read. I go back to it so many times. It is one of my favorite short stories to read. So it's about a rabbit that is a toy stuffed rabbit that over time becomes real. And it's not like real life or anything. It's a children's book, but there's a part in it where the rabbit, he's old and he's worn out, and the point of it is towards the end of his life, he's hoping that he will be made real. And he comes across a skin horse, a horse who is now real. You also used to be a toy. So one day the Velveteen rabbit goes on and asks, he's having a conversation with the skin horse, and he's asking the skin horse, what is real? Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick out handle? Because he was thinking being real would mean he would probably become like one of those wind up dolls that moves when you wind it up. And this is what the skin horse said to him. He said, real isn't how you're made. It is a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. And the rabbit asks the skin horse, does it hurt? And the skin horse says, sometimes, but when you are real, you don't mind being hurt. And the rabbit asks, does it happen all at once, like being wound up? Or does it happen bit by bit? And this is the part that I love the most, the part that is really stuck in my head, is where the skin horse says, when it comes to being real, it doesn't happen all at once. You become. It takes a long time. That is why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily or who have sharp edges or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get all loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, once you are your real self, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. And when I was thinking about this topic and thinking about authenticity, I just always kept coming back to that quote. It is so true, because when you are being your authentic self, a lot of it is a journey of vulnerability, but a lot of it also isn't getting rid of the bad parts of you. I think like sometimes that's our approach to it. We want to be our authentic self, but we want to be it in a way that we have a good, quote unquote, better version to present out to ourselves. But understanding that your authentic self, or getting to know like who you really are, means embracing all the parts of you. This is now becoming a recurring theme, because I know for a fact that this is what I talked about on the last episode, but I think it's good. Like, we're going to be talking about it over and over and over again. The general theme is truly loving yourself. I like to say you can't hate yourself into becoming the person that you love. So yeah, I feel like I've strung a lot of thoughts together in trying to really understand what it means to being your authentic self and answering that question, who am I really? But I'm also very aware that this is a very personalized journey. So to help, I put together a list of questions that I think would be very helpful on your journey to getting to know yourself. Questions that I've asked myself over the years and I still find myself asking myself. So wherever you are on your journey, I think these questions might be helpful to you. Like I said, this is a process. It's a journey. It's not a destination. There's no end to being. So as long as you're alive, you'll be finding out things about yourself. So I just hope these questions in a way won't send you down into a deep spiral. It's more supposed to help you reframe the way you ask certain questions. Because I'll give you an example. When I was talking to my friend yesterday, an example that came up with the both of us is, she asked, how about when we have to go into spaces where you haven't met the people there at all? Should you be asking who's going to be there? Or who do I want to be to those people? I understand why we would think about it that way, but I think asking the question of who is going to be there, or who do I want to be to these people, is putting a lot of expectations on things that we can't control, which is other people. An example of a question that I would ask if I were going into a space where I haven't met the people there would be, how do I want to feel in this space? How do I want to show up in this space? If it's something where we're all supposed to contribute, what do I want to contribute? Thinking about who's going to be there and who you want to be to them. Those are things that are out of your control. Those are things that puts you in the mindset of wanting to perform, to put on a performance. But you go in with ease. You know how you want to feel in this space. You know how you want to show up in that space. So you go in to those spaces, you show up the way you want to show up. And that way the people that are meant for you will find you, but you will also be able to react to the experiences in that space with a lot more truth, from a place of alignment with yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to be one specific version of yourself. Sometimes it would mean you are sillier in that space. Sometimes it means, there's a funnier version of you. Sometimes it would be a more serious. Those are all different parts of you. You don't have to be one person in order to feel like you are being your authentic self, or that you're not being authentic. And I've said this before earlier, but I also want to reemphasize that you should not put your life on pause or deem yourself unworthy of the things that you want. You are on a journey to getting to know yourself first. And I feel like this is even more important to say now in a world that has found a way to commercialize and intellectualize healing. You do not have to be a fully healed person, whatever that even means, before you are worthy of love, whether it is platonic love or romantic love, before you have to be worthy of good things, of a good job, of a good career, of good dreams. You let your imagination take you as wide and as wild as you want to be. You don't have to wait until you've worked on your confidence level in order to speak in public. You don't have to wait until you love your body to express yourself. You really don't. And this is something that I have to remind myself of too, because the irony is you can't be any of the things that you want to be without first starting from the point that you are at. It takes practice. It takes practice to be yourself. And for most of us, our caretakers and our parents and our caregivers from when we're younger did not instill that in us enough, that it takes practice to get to know who you are. It takes practice at every single stage of your life. So we kind of set out into the world expecting to have all the answers and get disappointed with ourselves and beat down on ourselves for not knowing the things that we just weren't taught to know or that we just haven't practiced enough. It takes time. Okay, becoming yourself takes time. Being yourself takes time to practice. It is an ongoing thing. It's not a one size fits all. And as scary as it can be, as daunting as it can be, I hope you won't run away from it. So I will leave all the questions that I think will be helpful to you in a PDF, and I will leave the link in the description of this episode or in the link in my bio, depending on where you're listening to this on. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope that as you're answering these questions that you find and are comfortable enough to put down all the different things about yourself that you find. I like to write out a lot of different, sometimes contradictory things about myself. I write, I'm very careful, but I'm also very clumsy. I'm very silent, but I can be clunky, and oftentimes I'm loud. I'm very shy in public when it comes to dancing, but I'm also a huge, silly dancer. I am a great sibling. I am a great friend, but I also, say that I know that I could be a better friend. I could be a better partner. I could be a better sibling. I am full of love in all my messiness. I'm very organized, but I can also be extremely chaotic. I can be very abrasive, but I can be very gentle. I love people. I love watching people human, but it can also be sometimes really exhausting to be around people. I can find people to be very annoying. I have a really big heart, and sometimes I have to cradle it myself. And sometimes I think the best ways to love myself is to give myself the love that I need. There are lots of different ways in which we exist in all our different forms, and not all of those are inauthentic to you. Sometimes all of those things together make you who you are. And I hope some of those questions bring you a little closer to not just getting to know who your authentic self is, but also being more comfortable accepting who that person is, or just being more comfortable just not knowing yet, because sometimes you're just not going to know. And I hope that whenever you're listening to this, that you are able to find some peace in just not knowing for now. And I'm sending you all my love, and I hope you have a great week ahead, and I will speak to you on the next episode. Bye.